I shall now go into the file system to show you the files that I've just created. I'll go into the YouTube directory. As well as each subsystem having its own database, it will also have its own subdirectory under the Radicore root directory in order to keep all its files totally separate from all the other subsystems. So here are the class files. These are the first two files that were exported from the data dictionary. The first one for the table YouTube is the class file, which when initially created will only contain a constructor, because all the other methods will be inherited from the abstract table class. Now the constructor itself identifies the database name, the table name, and calls this standard method to load the field specs, which will come from this second file exported from the data dictionary, which is tablename.dict.inc, which is the table structure file. This contains all the relevant information on the structure of this particular table in the database. Now the first entry here is for the field spec array. Now for each entry here, it is the column name or the field name which exists on this particular table, and against each field name it will have the specifications for that field. So here is an integer which is auto increment with that minimum and maximum value. It is also a primary key and required. Here is a name field, 50 characters required. A longer description field, which is 255 characters, not required. An integer column with that minimum and maximum value. An unsigned integer, so the minimum value is 0. Here is another integer, which is required. A date field, not required. A date field which is required. Now here's a decimal number which allows up to 2 decimal places, so it shows that minimum value and that maximum value. Here is another decimal number which is required. Now here is that Boolean field which started off in the database by having a native type of tinyInt, but which I then changed to Boolean. Because it was tinyInt, it has the default value of 0. But because I changed it to Boolean, it now indicates to me, because it is an integer field, what the values for true and false are. And I set the control to radio buttons, which I could have set to either a drop-down list or a checkbox, but I chose a radio button. This takes its default values from an inbuilt array known as Boolean. Now the primary key is also indicated here. This is an array because any primary key can be a compound key, so it can contain any number of columns. But in this case, there's only the one column. Now, any database table can have an optional number of other unique keys or candidate keys, but this array is empty at present. Now, because I have not related this table to any other table in the database, the child relations array is empty and the parent relations array is empty. Now the audit logging is flagged. By default it is set to true, which means that whenever I make any changes to this database table, to the contents of the table, those changes will be logged to the audit log. This can be changed to false if required by going into the data dictionary. Now there's also a default order by which is used on the list screen. So if you wish to override the default sort sequence set by the database, you can change it to whatever you like here, any particular column name or column names, and either ascending or descending. Now I shall ignore these other columns for the time being. Now the other files that were created were in the screens subdirectory under the English language subdirectory. Now here I have the screen structure file for the list screen. Now here it shows at the top the name of the XSL style sheet which will be used to render this page into HTML, because part of the screen processing is to take all the data from the framework and the model class, copy it to an XML file, then use an XSL transformation to then transform all that data into an HTML document. So for a list screen, because this will show multiple rows going across the page. The first array entries here will show the column widths, and then down here it shows the column name followed by the column label. These labels will be shown across the top of the display, and underneath all the rows will have these column names underneath. Now, after this file has been created, it is possible for the developer to go in and edit this file to move columns around, or add columns, remove columns, change the column widths, whatever he likes. So that is the structure file for the list screen. Now there is one other structure file. Now although there are 6 child screens, they will all by default use the same detailed screen to begin with. Now this points to a different XSL file, and because on the detailed screen there's only one record displayed at a time, the labels will be on the left and the column values will be on the right. So again, here you have the column name and the column value. And as before, this is the default structure file created from the data dictionary, but after it has been created, you can edit it as much as you like. You can move columns around, you can change the sequence that they're displayed, or you can add columns, remove columns. So that is a screen structure file. Now the last set of files were created. These are the component scripts which were generated when I chose the list 1 pattern. These are all the component scripts. I shall now go into the screens directory, which will show the screen structure files that were created for this family of forms. Because this comes from the list 1 pattern, the first screen structure file is list1.screen.inc. It is a feature of the Radicore Framework that all web pages are constructed using XSL transformations. This is where the data is first copied into an XML file and then transformed into HTML by using an XSL style sheet. So the first line here identifies which XSL style sheet is to be used. There will be one separate style sheet which is provided by the framework, which will be used for each transaction pattern. The second line identifies a table name which will be used as the element name for all data from this table, which will be added into the XML file. Now on the list 1 screen, this has a row of column labels across the top, under which rows of column data will be displayed across the page. So the first array here identifies the number of columns and their widths. The second array down here identifies which columns will be displayed in which order and their corresponding labels. Now this is the default structure file that is created, but after it has been created, the developer can at any time come in and modify it to actually add columns, remove columns, move columns around, or even change the column widths. Now this is the list 1 screen for the parent of this family. The other screen structure file is the detail screen, which again picks up a different XSL style sheet called the detail 1. Same table name as the element name in the XML document. Now this will show one row of data at a time with under 2 columns. The labels on the left and the column data on the right. Again, under here you will see all the column names with their labels. As with the list 1 screen structure file, this is just the default value which is created initially, but this can be edited by the developer to add columns, remove columns, or move columns around. The next set of files can be found in the subsystem root directory. Here are the 6 files that were created for the 6 members of this forms family. There is a separate script here which will be appearing in the URL whenever one of these tasks is run. Now I should go into the list 1 script first, as this is the parent of this family. Now this is quite a small script. I shall ignore this center section because this is optional. The main parts here where it identifies the class file to be run, which is also referred to as the model in the model view controller design pattern. This is the screen structure script, which represents the view part of the model view controller design pattern. And of course, this is the controller itself. Now, the system will look for this table ID as a class file in the classes subdirectory. It will look for this file in the screen subdirectory, and this file will be in the framework's include directory. Now, these page controllers are supplied by the framework and do not need to be created or modified by the developer at all. There is a separate controller for each of the transaction patterns built into the system. Now, the other component scripts follow the same pattern. They identify the table ID, the screen structure file, and the page controller, with a different controller for each of these 6 scripts. Nice and easy. I shall now show you the records that have been added to the Radicore database. Go to the menu subsystem, list tasks. This starts with the search screen by default, so I can select the YouTube subsystem, press submit, and these are the tasks which exist so far. This is a menu which I created earlier and which now contains the list 1 task, which is the parent task in this forms family. When I select this task, I can now show you the navigation buttons which will appear in the navigation button area of the screen when this parent task is activated. These 5 are the other members of the forms family which I just created. This 6th task is an audit task which already existed in the database but which is added to every list 1 task automatically. I can also use this menu button here to list all the menus in the system. Here, for example, you'll see there is the prototype menu, which contains those 4 prototypes plus the YouTube sample which we are currently running. There are other menus as well. I shall now show you some other files in the file system. Go to the XSL subdirectory. Here are XML files which are created each time a task is run. This contains the data that will be used during the XSL transformation process in order to produce the HTML document. Here, for example, is the XML file for the inquiry screen. You'll see it contains 1 record of data for that table. There's the lookup lists, CSS files, the action buttons, these appear at the bottom of the screen, menu buttons and breadcrumbs area, the scrolling area. This indicates that 3 records were selected, but it can display only 1 at a time. Now, this is the important part of the XML document. This is the structure element which was copied from the screen structure file which was originally exported from the data dictionary. This is used during the XSL transformation process in order to tell the style sheet which piece of information needs to go where on the screen. This is vitally important. These other areas down here are pieces of text. They are supplied at runtime rather than being hard-coded in the XSL style sheet, as there may be different language selections depending on the user's requirements.